Hello and welcome back to the caves, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic, where we're going to be doing another Loadouts Done Quick. This time we're going to be taking a look at the microwave gun. This is Driller's third secondary weapon, and a very strange weapon overall, but a pretty good weapon when combined with your primary weapons. So this will be just like the other Loadouts Done Quick, where we're going to be going over each of the overclocks, a build I'd recommend with it, and we're going to be using all of the primary weapons with our secondary. First up, let's talk about some pros and cons to the wave cooker just in general. Some of the pros to the wave cooker are that it has infinite range, so you can actually use this at any range to hit enemies, which makes it pretty effective for taking out long range squishy targets like leeches and web spitters. It can do okay against acid spitters as well, and it can also pair really well with any of your primary weapons if you build it to complement that. So this one can actually do a lot of damage per second. It's really good against small things too, so I guess that's another pro to it. It does a lot of damage per second when combined with the primary weapons, either with dealing damage over time or with a thermal shock build. The downsides to the wave cooker are that it doesn't really do that much damage per shot, and the other potential con to this is that you do want to make it suited to your weapon. So if you're switching through weapons really often, you might forget to change builds up. I do that all the time, and then I take something that I don't mean to with the wave cooker. It's not going to be the worst thing ever, but it could be better. So let's begin with our very first overclock. Our very first one is Mega Power Supply. This is a balanced overclock that is pretty strong for the wave cooker. This gets you extra ammo and extra rate of fire, but it makes it so your cooling rate is less, so your gun takes longer to cool down. And this also overheats your wave cooker for a little bit longer, where usually it overheats for 2 seconds, now it will overheat for 3 seconds. That's not actually such a bad downside, because if you never intend on overheating this, then you're not going to really see the downside, and then the upside is just you get a bunch of ammo and a lot more rate of fire, which is pretty cool. This one I have paired with improved thermal efficiency for the Cryo Cannon. That will be our primary weapon, and we're going to be building it towards the Cryo Cannon. With the wave cooker, you generally want to build towards the primary weapon, with a couple exceptions, and we'll go over them. So in tier 1 with the wave cooker, I'm running a larger AoE. This just allows us to hit potentially more enemies with the wave cooker, which I find to be pretty useful, especially since this is going to be a thermal shock build, so we just want to hit as many as possible, since if everything's frozen, we can potentially thermal shock all of them and kill them really quick. Although the other options in tier 1 can be pretty good. Damage is good if you want to kill long range things like leeches and web spitters a little bit quicker. Ammo can be good too if you just want even more ammo for this and you're just super ammo efficient then. Tier 2, kind of the same thing in tier 1. All of them are pretty good. I go with the heat sink to have less heat generation per shot, but that's not really necessary. You could go with higher rate of fire because you're not necessarily using this for long periods of time. Tier 3, I usually go with the temperature amplifier for this, although slowdown is also pretty good. Temperature amplifier makes it so that it can kind of spread your effects to other enemies nearby, so you could freeze them or you could burn them, which can be really good with those two. If you're using the sludge pump though, this doesn't really matter, and the slowdown would be better, but the slowdown is also pretty good, so if you like taking that one, feel free to. Tier 4, some people don't even take a tier 4 with the wave cooker. This just changes your lens size. So I have the wider lens on this, which I can activate just by hitting my reload button. This will make the lens wider and we can hit more enemies, but our gun overheats quicker. The other option is to make a smaller lens so that it's more concentrated and you get a higher rate of fire, but it can also overheat quicker that way just because the rate of fire is so much higher. Both of these can be good. Neither of them I use a whole lot with the wave cooker, honestly, really on any sort of build. So pick whichever one of these like, or maybe not even take a tier 4. And then in tier 5, we're going with the exothermic reactor. This one allows us to trigger the thermal shock status effect, and it's really good with the cryo cannon or with the flamethrower. For our next build, we're going to be taking gamma contamination. This is the radiation overclock for the wave cooker. This one is an unstable one, and it makes it so that there is a chance to inflict radiation onto an enemy. The radiation will then linger and deal damage over time. This actually does a decent amount of damage over time by the ticks. It also slows enemies down, and it technically hits other enemies that are next to the irradiated enemy as well. Downside to this though is that we get less ammo, we get less damage, and we get a tighter lens overall, so we can't hit as many enemies as easily. This is also a percentage chance, so sometimes this does take quite a while to trigger, which can be a little bit weird with this one. I decided to pair this overclock with Goo Bomber Special for the sludge pump because I haven't used it in quite a while, and this is like the all status effect build where you can just put a ton of status effects on an enemy, and it's really funny to do that. So in tier 1 we're going with extra ammo. This is just so that we can make up for that lack of ammo and we can use this a little bit more. Tier 2 we're going with the less heat generation just so we can use this a little bit longer, but any of them tier 2 are good. Tier 3 I'm taking the slowdown. We don't really get any benefit from the temperature, although if other teammates are bringing fire or ice, then you could still go with that one if you'd like. In tier 4, I'm going with the wider lens, but your choice on lens, or if you even want a lens. And then in tier 5, we're going with the contagion transmitter. This makes it so if an enemy is affected by the sludge, and we hit them with this, then it can inflict neurotoxin on top of them. so they can be getting slowed and eaten away by the sludge. They can have the neurotoxin on them, which slows them again and deals damage over time, as well as kind of marks them. And you can also have the radiation on it, which deals damage over time to them and everything else around them. Maybe not the strongest for long range, though. This one kind of struggles with that because all you got is the wave cooker with radiation, which isn't the worst, but maybe not the best either. Our next overclock is Blistering Necrosis, and I actually have this one built to where it can go with whatever, or it could even just go by itself because this build is fairly strong. So Blistering Necrosis is an unstable overclock that has a chance of spawning blisters onto enemies. Once these blisters are popped, they basically count as a weak spot when hit, and it deals extra damage to the enemy. This is just a % chance of this happening though, so this overclock can feel a little bit inconsistent at times. The way I have it set up is like this. So in tier 1 I'm going with extra ammo so we can use this more often. Tier 2, less heat generation. This one does actually increase our heat generation, so bringing that back to normal does help quite a bit, and I like this one a lot for blistering. In tier 3, I'm going with the slowdown, but you could take the temperature too if you're running this with cryo or flamethrower. I'm going to be running it with flamethrower. Tier 4, I got the wider lens again, but your choice, whichever lens you want. And then in tier 5, I'm going with boiler ray. Boiler ray makes it so that anytime that you kill an enemy, there's also a chance that it explodes and deals damage to all nearby enemies. This is pretty easy to do with Blistering Necrosis on medium-sized enemies like regular grunts and sometimes slashers. It can also be really good on like web spitters, and it's really strong against really small enemies like swarmers and jellyfish, just with Boiler Ray by itself, not even with Blistering Necrosis, because it just has a chance of blowing them all up and dealing a lot of damage to nearby enemies. Since you're doing extra damage thanks to the blisters popping, I find that this works pretty well just by itself, and you don't really need to go with either the Contagion Transmitter or the Exothermic Reactor. This one's just a very simple build, and it can pair really well with anything. I decided to pair this with Field Stream Diffuser for the flamethrower, and I went full reach flamethrower. That way we could have the longest reach with this and just be clearing off enemies at a distance. It was also really convenient on the mission we got because robots showed up and we were built all for fire. So we can light things on fire and deal damage over time, and then use Blistering Necrosis on any sort of long-range enemy, or to stack up a little bit more damage for our team. Our next overclock is Super Focus Lens. This is kind of a strange clean overclock, and I don't use it very much, but this one gets you 50% more damage when hitting enemies within 4 meters in front of the wave cooker. I decided to pair this with the Cryo Cannon, and I'm running Tuned Cooler with this. I'm actually running full freeze Tuned Cooler because I wanted to see how quickly we could freeze things. In tier 1, I'm going with extra ammo. You could actually go with more damage here, and that does make it so killing things at very close range is a little bit more consistent, like killing the regular grunts and anything else that gets close to you. It's really awkward to actually kind of use this at close range because most of the time you're just going to be using your primary at close range, but that is an option. Tier 2, heat sink so that we don't build up heat, but even tier 2 are good. Tier 3, we're going with temperature amplifier. That way we can potentially trigger more status effects with this. Tier 4, whichever lens you like, I'm going with the wider lens. And then in tier 5, we're going to the exothermic reactor once again. That way we can trigger the thermal shock once we freeze things. Like I said, this one is a little bit strange, and I don't use it a whole bunch, but it's okay enough. It is a clean overclock, so you can build it however you'd like. For our 5th overclock, we have Diffusion Ray. Diffusion Ray is a balanced overclock that makes it so your wave cooker can penetrate up to 3 enemies, as well as it slows them down at the cost of a little bit of damage. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and you could stack this with even more slowdown in tier 3. I actually chose not to do that because I'm pairing this with sticky fuel from the flamethrower, and we're building this as a temp shock build again. But if you were going to take this with the sludge pump, that is a really good option too if you want to stack the slowdowns. In tier 1, I'm going with wider lens once again so we can hit more enemies. More ammo and more damage is fine with this too. I switch between more ammo and the wider lens all the time with this one. In tier 2, heat sink once again, just so that we don't build up heat as much, but any of them in tier 2 are fine. They all work pretty well. If you want to stack the slow, then the extra rate of fire in tier 2 can actually be pretty good too, just because you can hit multiple enemies that way. In tier 3, temperature amplifier, because we are taking this with a temperature build, but if you wanted to stack slowdowns on this, you could with your other slowdown option. Tier 4, your choice. I'm going with wider lens so we can have the extra wide lens, but it's honestly not necessary. The wider lens is good enough. And then in tier 5, the exothermic reactor so that we can, once again, trigger the thermal shock status effect and deal more damage to more enemies. Taking sticky fuel, like I said with this, for the flamethrower, put down a bunch of sticky fuel with the flamethrower and watch enemies run across it, then use Diffusion Ray to slow them down and deal damage from the thermal shock triggering. And that actually works quite well on most missions. This isn't going to be the best on like a Dreadnought mission, but the flamethrower just isn't really the greatest on those ones anyway. On any other mission type where you have a lot of enemies, this one should get you through quite a ways without you needing a whole lot of ammo. And then for our final overclock, we have Liquid Cooling System. Liquid Cooling System is another clean overclock that makes it so you have slightly less heat generation, you have slightly better cooling, and you have slightly less overheat duration. So your wave cooker is just slightly better overall at everything, which is kind of nice. You can build this however you would like. I'm going to be pairing this with the sludge pump. However, I'm not going to be taking neurotransmitter. I'm going to be taking boiler ray for this. So you can kind of take whatever you'd like as a primary weapon. at least if you want to build it like this. In tier 1, I'm going with extra ammo just so that we can have more, but any of them in tier 1 are really good. Pick whichever you'd like. Tier 2, heat sink as well. Even less heat generation is nice. This one actually takes a long time to fully run out. You probably won't be using it too often to where it will actually overheat or where you're in danger of overheating, but this just makes it so it's even less. Tier 3, slowdown, since we're going with the sludge pump, and honestly slowdown's pretty good in general with this. Tier 4, wider lens, but pick whichever lens you would like in Tier 4. And then in Tier 5, boiler ray, that way we can pop multiple enemies. This is really strong against small enemies, and that's mostly what I use this for. Just any sort of swarmers or jellyfish, you can just pop a whole bunch of them and hold this on them until boiler ray finally triggers. That way you can just pop them and clear them up. This one's just a nice overclock though. It is clean and it's nothing but bonuses, so build this however you would like. I'm going to be taking this with disperser compound with the sludge pump, which is also great for crowd control. If you wanted something for a little bit more single target damage and still want to use a sludge pump, you could go with volatile impact mixture too. That would also be a really good option with this. The main goal here is just cover as much of the area with disperser compound as possible with the sludge pump, and then use this just to clear up anything that's small. You'll likely pop them. It's also really good for taking out longer range enemies because you can hold this on them a little bit longer, so it's a little bit better than the standard wave cooker for getting rid of like acid spitters. And that's all the overclocks for the wave cooker and a build that I recommend for them. Tell me your thoughts on the wave cooker down in the comments below. I know it's kind of a weird weapon and sometimes seems like a love it or hate it weapon, but I really enjoy it. I think it's great that it's in the game. It's also just really funny that Driller gets to have a microwave to kill the bugs with. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope to see you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye-bye!